Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you. I thought my sister was just being dramatic when she announced they were moving in starting tonight. Everyone clapped like she had just donated a kidney instead of stealing a roof. Then her fiancé slid a folder toward my dad. I work in real estate compliance, so I recognized the paperwork immediately. That folder was not about helping family, but about taking the house. Too bad for them. The house was not mine anymore. My name is Riley Adams, and if I had known what was waiting for me at the dinner table, I might have kept driving past the Holloway exit and never looked back. I was 34 years old, driving a reliable but unexciting sedan down the interstate, heading toward a house that technically belonged to my parents, but felt more like a museum of unresolved grievances. The GPS told me I had 10 minutes left, but my stomach had been tightening for the last 40 miles. This was supposed to be a family reunion dinner, a phrase that usually implies warmth and laughter. In my family, however, it usually meant an ambush disguised as a pot roast. The house on Maple Row was exactly as I remembered it, though perhaps a little more tired around the edges. It was a two-story colonial that had seen better decades, standing stoically against the gray Ohio sky. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a sleek black luxury SUV parked right in the center, taking up enough space for 2 cars. It was aggressive parking, the kind that announced presence before you even saw the driver. That had to be Derek. My sister Alyssa had a type, and that type was usually expensive and inconsiderate. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of stale coffee and anxiety. Before stepping out into the cool evening air, the front porch light was flickering, a rhythmic buzzing sound that grated on my nerves. I made a mental note to fix it before I left, a habit I could not seem to shake. I was always the fixer, the one who noticed the cracks in the foundation while everyone else was admiring the curtains. When I opened the front door, the smell of roasted garlic and expensive perfume hit me simultaneously. The house looked the same, filled with the clutter of 30 years of marriage, but the atmosphere was different. It was brittle. You could almost hear the air crackling with tension. My mother, Darlene, came rushing out of the kitchen. She was wearing an apron over a dress that was slightly too formal for a Tuesday night dinner, and her smile was so wide it looked painful. "Riley, you made it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a restraint than an embrace. "We were just waiting for you. Everyone is in the dining room." She ushered me in before I could even take off my coat. In the dining room, the table was set with the good china, the plates with the gold rim that we were never allowed to touch when we were kids. My father, Frank, was sitting at the head of the table. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched as if he were bracing for a storm. He gave me a brief nod, his eyes tired and avoiding mine. And then there was Alyssa. My sister was sitting to my father's right, looking like she was ready to headline a press conference. Her hair was blown out to perfection. Her makeup was flawless, and she was wearing a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than my first car. Next to her was Derek Vaughan, her fiancé. He was handsome in a generic corporate way, with teeth that were too white and a suit that fit a little too perfectly. He was scanning the room, his eyes darting from the crown molding to the built-in cabinets, not with appreciation, but with calculation. It was the look of a man conducting an inventory. "Hello, stranger," Alyssa said, her voice dripping with that saccharine sweetness she used when she wanted something. "I am glad you could tear yourself away from the city." "I work in compliance, Alyssa," I said, taking my seat across from them. "It is not exactly a glamorous city life." Derek chuckled, a dry sound that did not reach his eyes. "Compliance sounds thrilling. It keeps the lights on," I replied, unfolding my napkin. The dinner began in a stilted fashion. We passed dishes of potatoes and green beans, exchanging meaningless pleasantries about the weather and traffic. Mom kept trying to steer the conversation toward happy memories, bringing up vacations we took 20 years ago, but her laughter was too loud, too forced. She was performing for an audience of one, trying to convince herself that this was a normal, happy family gathering. Dad barely spoke, focused entirely on cutting his meat into tiny, precise squares. I watched Derek. He was not eating much. Instead, He kept looking around the room. He tapped his finger on the mahogany table, checked the stability of his chair, and glanced toward the hallway where the staircase was. It was subtle, but I spent my days reviewing property disputes and title frauds. I knew what it looked like when someone was assessing value. He was not looking at a childhood home. He was looking at equity. The shift happened when the wine was poured. Alyssa cleared her throat, the sound sharp enough to cut through the low hum of the refrigerator in the next room. She picked up her wine glass, holding it by the stem, and looked around the table with a beaming, triumphant smile. "I have some exciting news," she announced. Dad stopped chewing. Mom leaned forward, her hands clasped together as if she were praying. "Derek and I have been talking," Alyssa continued, placing a hand on Derek's forearm. "We know how hard it has been for you guys lately. The upkeep on this place, the size of it, everything. It is just too much for two people." She paused for dramatic effect. I felt a cold knot formed in my stomach. "So, we have decided to step up. We are moving in starting tonight." The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. Then Mom clapped. She actually clapped, her hands smacking together in a frantic rhythm. "Oh, Alyssa, that is wonderful!" she cried out, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "Did you hear that, Frank? They are coming to stay. They are coming to help us." Dad looked up, his expression unreadable. "Moving in," he repeated, his voice raspy. "Yes, Daddy," Alyssa said, her voice softening into a tone one might use with a slow child. "It just makes sense. Derek can commute from here, and I can be here to help Mom with the house. We do not want you worrying about a thing. Family helps family, right?" Mom turned to me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Isn't that great, Riley? Your sister is so generous." I stared at Alyssa. She was practically glowing, basking in the adoration, but I saw the way her eyes flickered toward Derek. A quick conspiratorial glance. This was not a spontaneous offer of help. This was a plan. "It is certainly a surprise," I said, keeping my voice level. "I did not realize you guys were looking to leave the city." Derek smiled, leaning back in his chair. "We are looking for a change of pace. And honestly, seeing this place, it has potential. It just needs the right management." Management. The word hung in the air, heavy and corporate. Then Derek moved. He reached down to the floor beside his chair and lifted a thick leather portfolio. It was heavy, bulging with documents. He did not put it on the side table. He did not leave it on the floor. He slid it directly onto the dining table right next to my father's plate, pushing the bowl of green beans aside to make room. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the wood was a dull thud, final and authoritative. "I just brought a few papers to get the ball rolling," Derek said, his tone breezy. "You know, just to make things easier. Administrative stuff. We want to make sure everything is streamlined so we can start taking care of the bills and the maintenance immediately." My father looked at the folder, then at Derek. "Papers?" he asked. "Just standard authorizations," Derek said, waving a hand dismissively. "Nothing you need to worry about. It just gives us the ability to talk to the utility companies, the insurance, that sort of thing. Less headache for you." My heart was hammering against my ribs. I work in real estate compliance. I look at property documents for 40 hours a week. I know what a utility authorization looks like. It is a single sheet of paper. The folder Derek had just placed on the table was at least an inch thick. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better angle without being obvious. The folder was slightly open. I could see the edge of the top document. It was upside down from my perspective, but the bold capitalized font at the top was unmistakable. "Quitclaim." Below that, another word caught my eye. "Authorization." The blood drained from my face. A quitclaim deed. They were not asking for permission to pay the electric bill. A quitclaim deed is used to transfer ownership of a property from one person to another, usually between family members, with no money changing hands. It is the fastest, easiest way to sign over a house. They were not moving in to help. They were moving in to take the title. I looked at Derek. He was smiling at my father, a predator looking at a wounded gazelle. He knew exactly what was in that folder. He was banking on my father's exhaustion and my mother's desperate need to keep Alyssa close. He was counting on them trusting him because he wore a nice suit and drove a nice car. And then I looked at Alyssa. She was sipping her wine, watching me over the rim of the glass. She saw me looking at the folder. She saw the realization dawn on my face and she smiled. It was a small, tight smile that said, "Do not you dare. I think we should discuss this later." "Frank," Mom said, trying to keep the mood light, though her eyes were darting nervously toward the ominous folder. "Let us just enjoy dinner." "Actually," Derek said, his voice smooth but firm, "it would be great if we could just get the signatures out of the way tonight. Then tomorrow, Alyssa and I can get straight to work on the roof estimates. I noticed some shingles missing when we pulled up. We do not want that leaking, do we?" He uncapped a pen. It was an expensive fountain pen, heavy and black. He placed it on top of the folder. Dad stared at the pen. He looked tired, so incredibly tired. He looked like a man who just wanted the problems to go away. And here was a young, confident man promising to make them disappear with a simple scribble of ink. I felt a surge of adrenaline, sharp and cold. This was a raid. It was a hostile takeover happening over roast beef and mashed potatoes. They have rehearsed this, the announcement, the emotional manipulation, the immediate presentation of the solution. They were bypassing discussion and going straight for execution. Alyssa turned to me, her expression finding concern. "You look pale. Riley, are you okay? You do not have to worry about any of this. I know you are not really savvy with house stuff or finances. Derek and I will manage everything. You just focus on whatever it is you do." The condescension was thick enough to choke on. She was painting me as the incompetent little sister, the one who needed to be protected from the grown-up business, ensuring that my parents would not look to me for advice. She was cutting me out of the conversation before I could even open my mouth. "She will manage everything." That was the phrase she used. I looked at the folder again. That inch-thick stack of paper represented hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity. It represented my father's 40 years of labor. It represented the only asset my parents had left in the world. And Derek Vaughan, a man who had been in our lives for less than a year, was trying to slide it into his pocket under the guise of being a beautiful son-in-law. My father reached for the glasses in his shirt pocket. He was going to look at it. He was going to entertain this. I took a sip of water, forcing my hand to be steady. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass. "That is very generous of you, Alyssa," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost bored. It was a tone I had perfected in boardrooms when telling developers that their permits were denied. Alyssa blinked, surprised by my lack of resistance. "Well, we just want to do what is right." "Of course," I said, "and Derek, you are right about the roof. It does need work." Derek nodded, looking pleased. "Exactly. And the sooner we get this paperwork sorted, the sooner we can handle it." He nudged the folder closer to my father. I watched the folder slide across the tablecloth. It stopped just inches from my father's hand. Alyssa thought she had won. She thought she had steamrolled me, charmed Mom, and exhausted Dad. She thought she was the queen of the chessboard, making a power move that would secure her financial future. She thought she was moving into her inheritance early. I looked at the quitclaim deed peeking out from the folder, and a cold, hard thought settled in my mind. They were not here to stay. They were here to steal. They thought they were taking the house tonight. Too bad for them. The house was not mine anymore, and it was not my father's either. But they did not know that yet. And as I watched Derek unscrew the cap of his pen with a flourish, I decided I was not going to tell them. Not yet. If they wanted to play a game of legal chicken, they had picked the wrong opponent. I was not just a sister anymore. I was the compliance officer, and I was about to audit their entire lives. Dad picked up the pen. "Hold on, Frank," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. Everyone froze. Derek's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Alyssa's eyes narrowed. "Pass the salt, please," I said, maintaining eye contact with Derek. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Derek stared at me, his jaw tightening. He slowly pushed the salt shaker toward me. "Thanks," I said. I sprinkled salt on my potatoes, taking my time. I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel their impatience burning. They wanted the house. They wanted the signature. Let them work for it. Let them dig their own grave, one piece of paper at a time. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted to make sure they were standing so deep in their own deception that they would never be able to climb out. I took a bite of potato. It was cold, but that was fine. Everything else at this table was freezing. To understand why I was sitting there calmly sprinkling salt on my potatoes while my sister plotted a coup, you have to understand the architecture of the Addams family. In every house there is a foundation and there is a facade. In our house on Maple Row, Alyssa was the curb appeal. She was the fresh coat of paint, the manicured lawn, the reason the neighbors slowed down to look. I was the plumbing. I was necessary. Sure, but if people were noticing me, it usually meant something had gone wrong. Growing up, the narrative was written in stone before I could even read. Alyssa was the golden child, the one who burned bright and demanded the oxygen in the room. I was the one who was expected to open a window so she did not suffocate us all. It was never spoken aloud in such stark terms. Of course, my mother, Darlene, was a master of the backhanded compliment, the kind that sounded like praise until you woke up at 3:00 in the morning realizing you had been insulted. Alyssa just knows how to live, Mom would say, watching my sister try on prom dresses that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. She has a spirit that cannot be contained. And then she would turn to me sitting in the corner with a book, wearing a hand-me-down sweater. And you, Riley, well, you are very sturdy. You are sensible. You do not need much. Dear, it was not a question. It was a command. I was not allowed to need much because Alyssa needed everything. By the time we were teenagers, the roles were calcified. Alyssa brought home drama like other kids brought homework. There were boys who broke her heart, teachers who did not understand her genius, friends who betrayed her. The house revolved around her moods. If Alyssa was happy, we were having pizza and watching movies. If Alyssa was sad, we were walking on eggshells, speaking in whispers so as not to disturb the grieving princess in the tower. I learned very early on that the best way to survive in the Addams household was to be invisible. I became a master of the fade. I learned to fix my own problems because bringing them to the dinner table meant competing for airtime I was never going to get. If I scraped my knee, I washed it out and put a bandage on it myself. If I struggled with math, I stayed up until 2 in the morning reading the textbook until the numbers made sense. I did not ask for tutors. Tutors cost money, and the money was for Alyssa's dance lessons, Alyssa's cheerleading camp, Alyssa's expanding wardrobe. This dynamic did not end when we grew up. It just became more expensive. I left Holleridge at 18. I packed my 2 suitcases and drove away in a beat-up compact car that sounded like a lawnmower. And I did not look in the rearview mirror until I crossed the state line. I went to college on loans and scholarships, working double shifts at a diner where the smell of grease permeated my skin so deeply I thought I would never smell like anything else. I graduated, I got a job, and I started climbing. But here's the thing about my family. They never asked. Over the last 15 years, I have built a career. I moved from entry-level processing to management, then to high-level compliance auditing. I handle portfolios for commercial developments that reshape city skylines. I have a 401k that is healthier than my father's heart, and my credit score is near perfect. But to Darlene and Frank Addams, I am still Riley the struggler. I am still the girl who is just getting by. Whenever I visited, Mom would look at my sensible clothes, high-quality fabrics, but not flashy labels, and give me a pitying smile. Are you doing okay, honey? Do you need us to send you back with some leftovers? It is tough out there. I know. I never corrected her. At first, it was out of pride. Then it became a strategy. I realized that if they thought I was struggling, they expected nothing from me. If I told them I was making 6 figures, the requests would start. Alyssa would need a loan for a new business venture that would inevitably fail. Mom would want to redo the kitchen by letting them believe I was barely keeping my head above water. I bought myself freedom. Alyssa, on the other hand, had turned failure into a spectator sport. She had been engaged 3 times before Derek. Each time it was a whirlwind romance, followed by a catastrophic implosion. And each time, the family rallied. The guys were always the villains. They were too controlling or too cheap, or they just did not appreciate her spark. Alyssa would come home weeping and broken, and Mom would set up the guest room, and Dad would write a check to cover her moving costs, her storage unit, her therapy, her retail therapy. It was a cycle of enabling that had stripped my parents' retirement savings down to the bone. And Dad, my father Frank, looking at him across the table now, picking at his food while Derek circled him like a shark. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. It was a mix of love and furious disappointment. Dad loved me. I knew that. But he loved me in the quiet, shadowed places where Mom could not see. When I was 16, my car broke down on the highway. I called him terrified. He came out in the pouring rain, fixed the alternator on the side of the road while trucks thundered past us, shaking the ground. When he was done, he wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag and looked at me. He did not hug me. He just reached into his wallet and pulled out $3.20 bills. "Keep the tank full, Riley," he had said, his voice low. "Do not tell your mother." That was our relationship in a nutshell. He would fix my car, but he would not fix my life. He would give me $1.60 of secret gas money, but he would not stand up at the dinner table and tell Mom to stop comparing me to a lister. He was a good man who had been slowly eroded by a lifetime of keeping the peace. He had sacrificed his backbone to keep the roof over our heads. And now that roof was at stake. The house on Maple Row was more than just a building. It was the physical manifestation of the family hierarchy. It was a beautiful, sprawling place with a porch that wrapped around the front and a big oak tree in the back. But I always felt like a guest there. My room was the smallest one, the one that doubled as the sewing room. Alyssa had the master suite on the second floor with the bay window. When I came back to visit, Mom would always say, "It is so good to have everyone home." But she did not mean me. She meant the idea of me. She meant the complete set. The house was a museum dedicated to the glory of the Addams family, but the exhibits were all Alyssa. Her trophies were on the mantel. Her graduation photos were the largest ones on the wall. My contributions were tucked away in albums in the closet. I did not resent the house. I resented the lie it told. That was why I went into real estate compliance. It was not a glamorous profession. Nobody writes songs about title searches or lien waivers. But I loved it because it was binary. In my world, there is no gray area. There is no emotional manipulation. A deed is either recorded or it is not. A signature is either valid or it is a forgery. The numbers add up or they do not. Paperwork does not have a favorite child. Paperwork does not gaslight you. Paperwork does not look at you with disappointment because you chose a state school instead of a private art college. Paperwork is cold, hard, and undeniably true. I found comfort in the absolutes of property law. I found peace in the rigid structure of contracts. While my sister was navigating the chaotic waters of emotion and drama, trying to charm her way through life, I was learning the rules that actually governed the world. I learned that the person who holds the deed holds the power, regardless of who is shouting the loudest. So, as I sat there listening to Derek explain how a quitclaim deed was just an administrative formality, a dark amusement bubbled up inside me. They thought they were dealing with Riley, the quiet daughter, Riley the spinster, Riley who drove a sedan and probably clipped coupons. They had no idea they were sitting across from a woman who had spent the last 10 years hunting down fraud for a living. I looked at Alyssa. She was leaning toward Dad, her hand on his shoulder, her face a mask of concern. "We just want to make sure you are secure." "Daddy," she said it was a performance she had perfected over 3 decades. It was the same face she made when she wanted a new car, or when she needed bail money for a boyfriend, or when she wanted the last piece of cake. It was the face that had worked on Frank and Darlene Addams every single time. But it did not work on me. Not anymore. I took a sip of my water, letting the cool liquid wash away the bitter taste of memory. I remember the time I won the science fair in 8th grade and Mom forgot to attend the ceremony because Alyssa had a meltdown over a haircut. I remembered the time I graduated college and the dinner conversation was entirely about Alyssa's new modeling portfolio. I remembered every slight, every overlook, every moment I was told to be quiet and grateful. I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, if I was good enough, they would finally see me. I used to think that one day the scales would balance. But sitting at this table, watching my sister try to swindle our parents out of their only asset, I realized the truth. The scales would never balance on their own. You have to put your thumb on them. This dinner was not a reunion. It was not a family gathering. It was a carving. They were carving up the turkey, and they were planning to carve up the estate right after dessert. Derek caught me looking at him. He gave me a wink, a small, arrogant twitch of his eyelid. He thought I was just an observer. He thought I was the audience for his great performance. I smiled back at him. It was the same smile I gave to developers right before I handed them a cease and desist order. You have no idea. I thought, you have absolutely no idea what I have done. I had spent my whole life being the invisible one, the one in the background, and that was exactly where I had hidden the knife. My success was a secret weapon forged in the silence they had imposed on me. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They forgot that the most dangerous things in the world, carbon monoxide, radiation, a mechanic's lien, are silent until it is too late. The past was a heavy thing sitting in the room with us like a ghost. But for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of it. I was not the little girl waiting for approval anymore. I was the one holding the pen, even if they did not know it yet. Mom stood up to clear the plates. "Riley, help your sister with the dishes," she said automatically. I stayed seated. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice steady, "I think Alyssa should sit. She has had such a big day planning all this. I will handle the dishes." Alyssa looks surprised, then smug. "That is sweet of you, Riley." She did not see the trap. She only saw the servitude. She saw the little sister doing what she was told. I stood up and picked up the stack of plates. As I walked past Derek, I saw him tap the folder again, impatient. Soon, I whispered to myself. I walked into the kitchen, the room where I had spent so many hours washing dishes while laughter drifted in from the living room. I set the plates down in the sink. Through the pass-through window, I could see them. Dad was putting on his glasses. Derek was uncapping the pen again. They were so sure of themselves. They were so sure that the world worked the way it always had. Alyssa takes, and everyone else gives. I turned on the faucet. The water rushed out, hot and steaming. I scrubbed a plate until it squeaked. Let them get comfortable. Let them think the ink is dry. Because when I finally dropped the hammer, I wanted to be sure it would shatter everything they thought they knew about this family and especially about me. To understand the sheer absurdity of the folder sitting next to my father's dinner plate, you have to understand the invisible history of the floorboards beneath our feet. My family looked at this house and saw a legacy. They saw a structure made of wood and brick that had sheltered us for 30 years. But I did not see wood and brick. I saw liens, encumbrances, and the cold hard mathematics of debt. And I knew something that nobody else at that table knew. I knew who actually owned the ground they were walking on. It started 4 years ago. That was the year everything broke. It started with the physical things. The furnace died in February and the roof started leaking in April. Then it moved to the biological things. My father needed a hip replacement and his insurance denied the claim twice before covering a fraction of it. And finally, it ended with the financial things. My parents had been living on credit cards to bridge the gap between their fixed income and the rising cost of being alive. They were drowning, and they were doing it with the quiet, desperate dignity of a generation that believes discussing money is a sin. At the time, I was working as a compliance manager for Keystone Ridge Title and Compliance. It was a firm that handled the messy back end of commercial and residential real estate. My job was to look for red flags, fraud, unrecorded liens, breaks in the chain of title. I spent my days staring at spreadsheets and county records, tracing the digital footprints of distressed assets. One Tuesday afternoon, I was running a routine search on foreclosure filings in our county. It was something I did to stay sharp, to see market trends. I typed in the zip code for Hollowage. A list populated on my screen, and there, buried in the middle of page 2, was a notice of default filed against a property on Maple Row. My heart had stopped. It was my parents' address. They were 90 days behind on their mortgage. The bank had already initiated the pre-foreclosure process. In another month, the house would have been auctioned off on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. I did not call them. I knew what would happen if I did. Dad would deny it out of shame. Mom would cry and then try to minimize it. And if I offered to pay it off, they would refuse. They would say they could not take my money. They would say I needed to save for my own future, or worse, they would take the money, but the dynamic would shift and the resentment would poison us. Or even worse than that, Alyssa would find out I had money and suddenly her needs would become emergencies. So I did what I do best. I treated it like a case file. I created a limited liability company. I named it Blue Fern Holdings. It sounded generic, corporate, and completely detached from the Adams family. A blue fern was just a plant that sat on the corner of my desk, the only living thing in my sterile office, using Blue Fern Holdings. I contacted the bank that held my parents' mortgage. I knew how these banks worked. They did not want to foreclose on a dilapidated house in a stagnant market. It was a hassle on their balance sheet. They wanted cash. I negotiated a purchase of the non-performing note. I used my savings money I had been hoarding for a down payment on my own life, and I bought my parents' debt. Then, acting as Blue Fern Holdings, I restructured the loan. I sent my parents an official-looking letter stating that their mortgage had been acquired by a new investment firm and that due to an internal restructuring program, their interest rate had been slashed to zero and their past due balance was being deferred to the end of the loan term. All they had to do was maintain a nominal monthly maintenance fee. It was a small amount, something they could easily afford with their pension checks. I remember the day they got the letter. I was visiting for the weekend. Mom was holding the paper, her hands shaking. "It is a miracle," she had whispered. "A literal miracle. They are not kicking us out. They are lowering the payments." I sat there drinking my coffee and said nothing. I watched the relief wash over my father's face, erasing 10 years of aging in 10 seconds. I had saved them. I had secured the roof over their heads. And I had done it without humiliating them. But nature abhors a vacuum. And in my family, any unexplained good fortune was inevitably attributed to the golden child. A week later, Mom called me. "You will never guess what we found out," she said, her voice vibrating with excitement. "I was talking to Alyssa about the letter from the investment company, and she got this little smile on her face. She would not say much. You know how modest she is, but she said she made a few calls to some friends in finance." I gripped the phone tighter. "Alyssa." "Yes," Mom continued. "Apparently, she knows someone who knows someone at this Blue Fern place. She pulled some strings for us. Riley, she saved the house." I felt a cold bitterness rise in my throat. Alyssa did not know a soul in finance. Alyssa thought an escrow account was a type of salad dressing, but she had seen an opening, a mysterious stroke of luck, and she had stepped right into the spotlight. "Did she say she did it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "She did not have to," Mom said. "A mother knows. She just told me not to worry about it anymore. That girl, she really is an angel. She might seem flighty to you, Riley, but when it counts, she comes through." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fax them the articles of incorporation for Blue Fern Holdings with my signature at the bottom. I wanted to tell them that while Alyssa was buying designer shoes, I was wiring $42,000 to a bank to keep the sheriff away from their door. But I did not, because if I told the truth, the peace would be shattered. Dad would feel small, Mom would be embarrassed, and Alyssa would spin it so that I looked like the villain for hiding it from them. So I swallowed the truth. It tasted like ash. Over the last 4 years, the legend of St. Alyssa grew. She started telling people around town that she was supporting our parents. I would hear it from old high school acquaintances. "It is so noble of your sister to take on the burden of the house," they would say. "She really stepped up." Alyssa wore the praise like a crown. She let everyone believe she was the financial pillar of the family. And meanwhile, every month on the 1st, an automatic transfer went from my personal checking account to the Blue Fern business account to cover the taxes and insurance that my parents' nominal payments did not quite reach. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that as long as my parents were safe, it did not matter who got the credit. I was protecting them from the world and I was protecting them from the truth. But sitting at the dinner table watching Derek slide that folder across the mahogany, the equation changed. Alyssa's lie was no longer just a vanity project. It was a weapon. Derek and Alyssa believed their own hype. They truly believed that the house was a clean asset. They thought that because the bank had stopped calling, The equity had magically returned. They thought they could move in, convince Dad to sign a quitclaim deed, and then leverage the property. They probably planned to take out a home equity line of credit to fund whatever business opportunity Derek was currently chasing. Or maybe they wanted to refinance and pull out cash to pay off their own debts. They were looking at the house and seeing a piggy bank. They did not realize that the piggy bank was empty, or rather, they did not realize that the piggy bank belonged to a corporation that I controlled. I looked at the paperwork in the folder. I could see the edge of a document titled Authorization to Release Information. They wanted Dad to authorize them to speak to the lender. If Dad signed that and Derek called the number on the mortgage statement, he would not get a bank in New York. He would get a voicemail box for Blue Fern Holdings, a voicemail box that I checked every morning. And if they dug deeper, if they tried to file that quitclaim deed at the county recorder's office, they would hit a snag, because when I bought the debt, I also filed a lien, a massive protective lien against the property to ensure that nobody, not a predatory lender, and certainly not a predatory sister, could sell or refinance the house without Blue Fern Holdings signing off on it. I had locked the house down to protect my parents from themselves. Now I was going to use that lock to trap my sister. Derek was still smiling, his hand resting near the folder. He looked so confident. He looked like a man who thought he was stealing candy from a baby. He did not know he was trying to steal a heavily encumbered asset from a compliance officer who specialized in fraud detection. The house on Maple Row was not a prize. It was a fortress, and I held the only key. I took another bite of my potato. It was dry, but I barely tasted it. My mind was racing, connecting the dots. They were moving in tonight. That was the rush. They wanted physical possession. In the world of real estate scams, possession is 910 of the law. If they established residency, if they got mail delivered here, it would be incredibly difficult to evict them. They were digging in like ticks, but they were making a critical error. They were assuming the house was Frank and Darlene's to give. I looked at my father. He was staring at the folder with a mixture of fear and resignation. He did not want to sign. I could see it in his eyes. He felt cornered. He felt like he owed Alyssa because she had saved them 4 years ago. The lie I had allowed to exist was now forcing his hand. Irony is a cruel mechanic. My silence had saved their dignity, but now it was endangering their home. If I spoke up now, if I slammed my hand on the table and shouted, "I own the debt. I am Blue Fern Holdings," it would end the scheme, but it would destroy the family. Mom would be humiliated. Dad would be crushed. Alyssa would explode. No, that was too messy. That was too emotional. I needed to handle this the way I handled everything at work. I needed to let them file their paperwork. I needed to let them commit to the lie. I needed to let them walk into the trap so deep that when the steel jaws snapped shut, there would be no ambiguity about who was in the wrong. Derek tapped the table. "So, Frank, what do you say? We can just get the notary stuff handled later, but this authorization lets us get started on the utilities." He was lying. The authorization was for the lender. He wanted to see how much equity was in the house. I watched Dad pick up the pen again. His hand was trembling slightly. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of the executioner who knows the blade is sharp. Go ahead, I thought. Sign it. Call the number. I wondered what Derek's face would look like when he realized that the bank he was trying to defraud was sitting across the table from him eating green beans. The house was not a home anymore. It was a battlefield. And for the first time in my life, I was not just the collateral damage. I was the general, and I had been preparing for this war for 4 years without even knowing it. The dinner plates had been cleared, but the appetite at the table had only grown. While my parents had finished their pot roast, Derek was just starting his main course. He was not eating food, though. He was consuming my father's autonomy. Bite by bite, I watched him lean back in his chair, swirling the last dregs of red wine in his glass. The casual slouch was calculated. It was designed to make him look relaxed, to make the conversation feel like a chat between men rather than a deposition. But I saw where his eyes were going. Every time my father looked down at his hands, Derek's gaze flicked over his shoulder to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the living room. That was where the filing cabinet was. That was where the life insurance policies, the car titles, and the old tax returns lived. Derek did not look at my parents and see people with histories and heartbeats. He saw signatures waiting to happen. He saw a walking, breathing power of attorney. "Frank, you are looking a little pale tonight," Derek said, his voice dropping an octave into a register of faux concern. "You have been keeping up with your checkups, right? At your age, you cannot be too careful." My father straightened up, bristling slightly at the implication of frailty. "I am fine, Derek. Just a long week, of course," Derek said smoothly. "It is just that Alyssa and I worry. We were looking over some actuarial tables the other day just for our own planning. You know, and it is crazy how fast things can turn. Do you guys have your long-term care insurance sorted out? That stuff can eat up a savings account in 6 months if you're not protected." He did not wait for an answer. He just let the fear hang in the air like smoke. He was planting the seed of vulnerability. He wanted Dad to feel old. He wanted him to feel like the world was a dangerous, expensive place that he was no longer equipped to navigate alone. And then came the pivot. "That is actually part of why we want to get this paperwork started tonight," Derek continued. "If we refinance the house under a new structure, we can pull out some equity to create a safety net for you. Cash on hand. It takes the pressure off. You would not have to worry about the roof or medical bills. You would just enjoy your retirement." He made it sound so simple. Refinance, cash out, enjoy. He skipped over the part where refinancing a house with no income and bad credit usually meant predatory interest rates or adding a cosigner who would eventually seize the title. My father looked at the folder again. "Refinance?" he asked. "We barely saved the house last time. I do not know if I want to mess with the loan." Derek waved a hand, dismissing the objection as if it were a fly. "That is exactly why you need us, Frank. You do not have to mess with it. I will handle the brokers. I speak their language. All you need to do is sign a few places to authorize me as your representative. It is just standard procedure to get the ball rolling." I sat there gripping my water glass so hard I thought it might shatter. This was the technique in my line of work. We call it the presumptive close. You do not ask the victim if they want to sell. You assume the sale is already made and offer them a choice on the details. He was not asking if they wanted to refinance. He was telling them how he was going to do it for them. He was framing the narrative so that the only two options were sign the paper and be safe, or refuse and die broke and alone. While Derek was working on Dad, Alyssa was running her own flank operation on Mom. Mom stood up to go to the kitchen for coffee, but Alyssa was there instantly, her hand on Mom's arm. "Sit down, Mama," Alyssa cooped. "You have been on your feet all day. Let me get the coffee. You are working too hard." Mom sank back into her chair, looking grateful, but also a little confused. "Oh, thank you, honey. I am serious," Alyssa said, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "When Derek and I move in, you are not lifting a finger. I am going to take over the kitchen. I will handle the grocery shopping. You are done with the drudgery." She walked toward the kitchen, but she did not go straight to the coffee maker. She paused by the door frame where the hook for the house keys was mounted. I saw her reach out and brush her fingers against the spare set of keys. It was a casual gesture, almost unconscious, but to me it was a territorial marking. She was checking the inventory. She was assuring herself that access was guaranteed. Alyssa was not offering to cook because she loved culinary arts. She was offering to take over the household management because whoever controls the groceries controls the budget, and whoever controls the budget controls the people. She was demoting my mother from matriarch to dependent in the span of a single evening. I needed to breathe. The air in the dining room was too thick with deception. "I am going to help clear the rest of these," I said, standing up and grabbing the serving platter. I carried the heavy ceramic dish into the kitchen. Alyssa was already there, rummaging through the cupboards, making a show of looking for coffee mugs. "Where do you keep the good cups?" "Riley," she asked without looking at me. "Top shelf. Left side," I said. "Same place they have been since 1995. She laughed, a brittle sound. "Right. Well, I guess I will have to reorganize when I settle in. Things need a refresh." I walked past her and pushed open the screen door to the back porch. I needed cold air. I stepped out into the darkness, letting the screen door click shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, inhaling the smell of damp leaves and impending rain. The window to the dining room was to my left, glowing with yellow light. I could see the silhouette of my father, his head in his hands. Then I heard a voice. It was coming from the side yard just around the corner of the house. It was low, urgent, and undeniably Derek. He must have slipped out the side door while I was clearing the table. He was on his phone. "Yeah, I know the timeline," Derek was saying. His voice was sharp, stripped of the fake warmth he used on my father. "We are moving in tonight. I will have utility bills in my name within 30 days. That establishes residency." I froze. I pressed myself against the siding of the house, holding my breath. "No, the underwriting is tight." Derek continued, "They will not release the funds without a cosigner or a clear title transfer. That is why I need the quit claim. If I get the title, we can leverage the whole property. It is valued at 300,000. Even with the existing debt, there is 100 grand of equity we can tap." My stomach turned over. He was already spending the money. He had done the math, or at least the math he thought was real. There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. "Don't worry about the old man," Derek scoffed. "He is soft. He is scared of his own shadow. I just have to frame it as protection. He will sign. He does not even read what he is signing half the time." I felt a flash of white-hot rage. The old man. My father was a decorated veteran and a man who had worked in a steel mill for 40 years. And this cheap suit in a luxury car was calling him soft. Then came the sentence that turned my blood to ice. "Look, if he wiggles out of it tonight, we will do it the other way," Derek said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have his signature from the birthday card he sent us. It is distinct. I can replicate it if push comes to shove. I just need the notary stamp. And you said you had a guy for that." I clamped a hand over my mouth. This was not just manipulation anymore. This was conspiracy to commit forgery. This was a felony in the planning stages. The other way. He was prepared to trace my father's signature and pay off a crooked notary to steal the deed. I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel. Derek was coming back toward the side door. I waited 5 seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and then I opened the screen door and slipped back into the kitchen. Alyssa was pouring coffee. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Where did you go?" she asked. "Just getting some air," I said. My voice sounded surprisingly steady. Derek walked in from the hallway a moment later. He was beaming, rubbing his hands together. "Fresh air does a body good," he said, winking at me. "But we should get back to business." We returned to the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted again. It was heavier now. The endgame was approaching. Derek sat down and slid the folder directly in front of my father. He pulled the cap off the heavy black pen again. "Okay, Frank," he said. "Let us get this done so you can sleep easy tonight." Alyssa reached over and adjusted the pen. She turned it so the grip was facing my father's right hand. It was a ritualistic gesture, like a priest preparing a sacrifice. She stared at the pen, then at Dad, her eyes willing him to pick it up. "Just sign it, Daddy," she whispered. "For us, for the family." I looked at my father. He looked trapped. He picked up the pen, his fingers trembling. "Dad," I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. Everyone looked at me. Derek's head snapped up, his eyes cold. Alyssa's face tightened. Alyssa snapped. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "Do not sign anything you have not read thoroughly." Mom let out a sigh of exasperation. She slammed her coffee cup down on the saucer. "Riley, please," Mom said. Her voice was shrill. "Why do you have to be so difficult? Your sister is trying to help us. She is moving her whole life here to take care of us, and you are acting like she is a criminal. Can't you just be supportive for once?" The accusation hit me like a physical slap. Difficult. I was the one who paid the bills in secret. I was the one who ensured they had a roof. And I was the one being called difficult for suggesting that my father read a legal document before signing away his life. I looked at Mom. She was terrified. She was terrified of losing Alyssa, terrified of the house falling apart, terrified of change, and she was projecting all that terror onto me because I was the safe target. I was the one who would not leave. I looked at Derek. He was watching me with a smug, challenging expression. He thought he had won. He thought that by turning my mother against me, he had neutralized the only threat in the room. "Go on, Riley," Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Tell us why Frank shouldn't trust his own family." I looked at the pen in my father's hand. I could scream. I could tell them what I heard outside. I could tell them about the forgery threat. But if I did that, it would be my word against his. He would deny it. He would say I was jealous or crazy or lying. Mom would believe him because she wanted to believe him. Dad would be confused, and the doubt would remain. In the world of compliance, hearsay is garbage. You do not win a case by shouting about what you heard. You win by showing what you can prove. I needed the paper trail. I needed him to commit. I needed him to put his pen to paper and create the evidence that would hang him. If I stopped him now, he would just try again tomorrow when I was not here. He would forge the signature when I was back in the city. I had to let this play out. I had to let him think the trap was safe to enter. I took a deep breath and forced my shoulders to relax. I picked up my fork. "You know," I said, looking straight at Derek. "You are right, Mom. I am sorry. I am just protective." I saw the tension drain out of Mom's shoulders. Alyssa smirked. Derek nodded, satisfied that he had put the little dog back in its kennel. "But, Dad," I added, my voice soft, "just make sure you understand the terms. That is all." I was not arguing anymore. I was waiting because people like Derek Vaughan do not stop when they get what they want. They get greedy. And when they get greedy, they get sloppy. I watched my father lower the pen to the paper. I did not fight. I did not raise my voice. I sat there and prepared to witness the crime, because the only way to catch a thief who thinks he is invisible is to turn on the lights exactly when his hand is in the jar. And I was just waiting for my hand to reach the switch. The heavy oak front door of my parents' house clicked shut behind me, muting the sound of my mother clattering dishes in the kitchen. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching loudly under my heels in the quiet night. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and the impending rain that had been threatening all evening. To anyone watching from the window, it looked like I was just going to my car to retrieve something I had forgotten, maybe a phone charger or a sweater. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan and closed the door, sealing myself inside the only space that felt safe. I did not start the engine. Instead, I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed my laptop bag. My hands were trembling slightly, not from cold, but from a mixture of rage and adrenaline. I took a deep breath, forcing the tremor to stop. In my line of work, emotion is a liability. Precision is the only thing that matters. I opened the laptop, the screen flaring to life and casting a ghostly blue glow over the dashboard. I connected to the mobile hotspot on my phone and typed in the URL for the County Recorder Public Access Portal. I have spent thousands of hours on this website. I know its layout better than I know the lines on my own palm. It is a digital graveyard of debts, transfers, liens, and releases. Most people look at a house and see a home. I look at a house and see a chain of title. I typed in the address 412 Maple Row. The search wheel spun for a second before populating the results. The deed history was there, familiar and comforting. The original purchase by Frank and Darlene Adams 30 years ago, the mortgage refinanced 10 years ago, and then the assignment of the mortgage to Blue Holdings 4 years ago, the secret transaction that had saved us. But I was not looking for the past. I was looking for the present. I navigated to the Pending and Suspended Filings tab. This is a section of the database that the general public rarely checks. It contains documents that have been submitted electronically but have been flagged for errors, mismatched names, or unpaid fees before they become official record. There was one entry. It was dated 3 days ago. My breath caught in my throat. It was a notice of intent to file coupled with a draft for a change of address for tax purposes. I clicked on the document details. The filing had been suspended by the clerk's automated system. The reason code was name mismatch authorization required. The filer had tried to change the mailing address for the property tax bills from Maple Row to a P.O. box in the city. The system had flagged it because the owner of record on the financial lien was Blue Firm Holdings, and the filer did not have the correct authorization codes to override the lien holder's preferences. I scrolled down to the metadata section. In the digital age, nothing is anonymous. Every document uploaded leaves a fingerprint. Submitter ID Devon 2 associated email Devon Invest. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. Derrick had not just decided to move in tonight. He had already tried to divert the tax bills 3 days ago. He wanted the correspondence to go to him, not my parents. If you control the mail, you control the information. If my parents stopped seeing the tax notices, they would not know if payments were missed or if ownership was being contested. He was trying to make them ghosts in their own home, but that was not enough. A failed tax address change was suspicious, but it was not a smoking gun. I needed to know who I was dealing with. I needed to know if Derrick Vaughan was just a greedy fiancé or a professional predator. I'd opened a new tab and logged into a subscription-based background search that I used for work. It aggregates public records from couriers across all 50 states. I typed in Derrick Vaughan, common name, thousands of hits. I refined the search. Derrick Vaughan plus real estate plus litigation. The list shrank to 12 hits. I scanned the locations: Ohio, Michigan, and then a cluster of activity in Arizona about 5 years ago. I clicked on a case file from Maricopa County. Vantage Point Properties, LLC vs. the estate of Alelena H. Regs. I read the case summary. Vantage Point Properties, a company listed with Derrick Vaughan as the managing member, had sued an elderly woman's estate, claiming they had a valid quitclaim deed signed 3 weeks before her death. The family contested it, claiming the signature was forged and the woman had dementia. The case was settled out of court. The terms were undisclosed. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He had done this before, or at least he had tried. He targeted the vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, the confused. He used shell companies to create a layer of separation. He was not a boyfriend. He was a parasite looking for a host. I grabbed my phone. It was nearly 9:00 at night, but I knew Marianne would be awake. Marianne Cole was one of the sharpest real estate attorneys in the state, a woman who ate fraud for breakfast and asked for seconds. We had worked together on a massive title insurance fraud case 2 years ago. She answered on the second ring. "Riley, is everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice tight. "I am sitting in my driveway. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to tell me I am not crazy." I laid it out for her. The sudden move in, the pressure on my dad, the file on the table the other way comment I overheard in the yard, and the attempted tax filing I was looking at on my screen. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the scratching of a pen on paper. Marianne was taking notes. "Riley," she said finally, her voice low and serious, "you are not crazy. You are watching a classic adverse possession setup accelerated by familial fraud." "I knew it," I whispered. "He is trying to establish tenancy," Marianne explained, her lawyer brain kicking into high gear. "Once he moves his stuff in and sleeps there for a few nights, he is a tenant in Ohio. Getting a tenant out who refuses to leave can take months. He uses that time to grind your parents down. He isolates them. He intercepts the mail, and eventually he gets the signature or he forges it." I said right, she agreed. "And once he has a recorded deed, even a forged one, he can borrow against the equity. He finds a hard money lender who doesn't ask too many questions, takes out $100,000 at 12% interest, and then vanishes. Your parents are left with the debt and a foreclosure notice." My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "He is not going to get that far. Riley, listen to me," Marianne warned. "You cannot just storm in there and accuse him. If you do, he will claim it is a misunderstanding. He will say the tax filing was an error. He will say he was just trying to help. He will gaslight your parents and paint you as the jealous sister. You need irrefutable proof. I have the attempted filing." I said. "It is not enough," she countered. "It is suspicious, but it is not a crime to try to change an address. You need to catch him in the act of filing a fraudulent instrument. You need him to cross the line from pushy relative to felon." I closed my eyes. I knew she was right. I need to talk to Loopers. I said, Luker's brat. He was an investigator with the county prosecutor's office, specifically in the D-fraud unit. We had met at a seminar on white-collar crime last year. He was a good guy, cynical but effective. Do it, Marianne said, and Riley locked down that house. I hung up and scrolled to Lucas's number. It was late to call a cop, but this could not wait. He picked up, his voice groggy. Adams, this better be good. I have a live one. Lucas, I said, and it is at my parents' house. The grogginess vanished from his voice instantly. Talk to me. I gave him the summary, shorter this time, hitting the key points: the suspended filing, the Arizona history, the threat I overheard about replicating the signature. When I finished, Lucas let out a long, slow whistle. Okay, he said, here is the situation. Like your lawyer friend probably told you, being a scumbag is not illegal. Being a squatter is a civil matter. But forgery, uttering a forged document, that is my playground. What do I do? I asked. If he is talking about forging a signature, he is likely going to try to push a notarization through. Lucas said he needs a notary who will either look the other way or one he can fool, or by he brings in his own guy. He mentioned he knew a guy for the stamp. I recalled. Bingo. Lucas said if he brings in a crooked notary, that is conspiracy, but we need him to actually present the document. We need him to put the paper on the table and say this is signed and valid until he tries to use the fake document. We cannot touch him, so I have to let him do it. I asked, feeling a wave of nausea. I have to let him hold a gun to my father's head, figuratively. Yes, Lucas said, but we can control the environment. When is the next time he is pushing for the signing? He wanted it tonight, but I stalled him. I said he will probably try again in a day or two, maybe sooner if he gets desperate. Okay, Lucas said, you need to set the stage. Tell him you want to do it properly. Tell him you want to have a family dinner to celebrate the agreement and finalize the paperwork. Make him feel safe. Make him feel like he has won. And then you call me. You want to sting him. I want to catch him with the pen in his hand. Lucas said grimly, if he produces a document with a fake signature, or if he tries to coerce your father into signing a deed under false pretenses while we are listening, that is a wrap. But you have to have the stomach for it, Riley. You have to sit there and let him think he is robbing you. I looked up at the house through the front window. I could see the silhouette of Alyssa laughing. She was probably pouring more wine, celebrating her victory. She had no idea that her fiancé was a con artist. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care as long as she got her cut. The nausea in my stomach faded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I had spent 4 years protecting this house in the shadows. I could spend 2 more days protecting it in the light. I have the stomach for it. Lucas, I said. Good, he replied. Get me the date and time. I will be parked down the street. And Riley, do not tip your hand. If he smells a rat, he will bolt, and he will take whatever cash he can steal from your parents' bank accounts on his way out. I will be the perfect sister, I promised. I hung up the phone and closed my laptop. The screen went black, plunging the car back into darkness. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain begin to tap against the roof. It was a gentle sound, rhythmic and steady. I had the evidence of his past. I had the digital footprint of his intent. And now I have the law waiting in the wings. Derek Vaughan thought he was the hunter. He thought my parents were the prey. He thought I was just an annoyance, a speed bump on his road to a quick payday. He did not realize that by stalling him tonight, I hadn't just delayed him, I had bought myself time to dig his grave. I reached for the door handle. I had to go back inside. I had to say goodbye. I had to hug my sister and shake Derek's hand and pretend that everything was fine. I had to invite them to a dinner where I would serve them up to the police on a silver platter. The next time we all sat down at that mahogany table, there wouldn't just be roast beef and green beans. There would be a trap, and Derek was going to walk right into it, smiling all the way. The art of the ambush is not in the attack. It is in the retreat. If you want an enemy to overextend themselves, you have to give them ground. You have to make them believe that their advance is the result of their own brilliance rather than your deliberate withdrawal. The morning after the disastrous dinner, I called Alicer. I waited until 10:00, the time she usually finished her second cup of coffee, and felt most benevolent toward the world. When she answered, her voice was clipped, expecting a fight. "What do you want, Riley?" she asked. I took a breath, channeling every ounce of submissive younger sister energy I had suppressed for decades. "I want to apologize," I said. "I was tired last night. I think I let my work stress bleed into the dinner. I did not mean to be so aggressive with Derek." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her ego inflating, filling the silence. "Well, you were pretty rude," Alyssa said, her tone softening into that familiar condescension. "Derek was just trying to help Dad. He has a lot of experience with this stuff." I know I lied. "That is why I want to make it right. Why don't we do dinner again tomorrow night? Just as family, I want to look over the plan properly. If Derek has a strategy to lower the overhead on the house, I should at least hear him out." Alyssa let out a sigh, the sound of a burden being lifted. "That is all we wanted, Riley, just for you to be open-minded. Derek will be so relieved. He really just wants us all to be on the same page." "Great," I said. "Tomorrow night, 7:00, and tell Derek to bring that folder back. I want to see the numbers." I hung up the phone and felt a cold knot of satisfaction in my stomach. She had taken the bait. She thought I was capitulating. She thought I was bowing down to the golden child dynamic that had ruled our lives since 1992. She did not know that while I was on the phone with her, I was sitting in the office of Marian Cole, looking at a stack of documents that were designed to strangle her little scheme in its crib. Marianne slid a thick packet across her glass-topped desk. "Here is the shield," she said. I opened the folder. It was beautiful. It was a masterpiece of legal obstruction. Marianne walked me through it. "First, we have a declaration of homestead. This protects the equity in the home from certain creditors just in case Derek tries to forge a lien. Second, and this is the kicker, I drafted a family trust amendment. Since you control the underlying debt through Blue Fern Holdings, this document explicitly states that any transfer of title requires the notarized consent of the lien holder, meaning me." I said, "Meaning you," she confirmed. "And finally, I drafted an occupancy agreement. It states that Alyssa and Derek are guests, not tenants, and it sets a hard limit on their stay 30 days unless they pay market rate rent into an escrow account. It also explicitly forbids them from using the address for commercial purposes or credit applications." I ran my fingers over the paper. It was heavy textured stock. It looked official because it was official. "If they sign these, they are neutered." I said. Marianne nodded. "Exactly. And if they refuse to sign, then they reveal their intent." I finished. "If they are really here to help family, they will have no problem with a document that protects the family asset. If they are here to steal, they will balk." It was a win-win scenario. Either they signed the safety net or they exposed the knife. But I knew Derek would not sign. He was too deep in. He needed that equity. He would try to maneuver around it. And that was where Lucas came in. I met Lucas in a diner parking lot 3 hours later. He did not look like a cop. He looked like a tired dad wearing a faded windbreaker and driving a sedan that had seen better days. He handed me a small flat device. "Digital voice recorder," he said. "High fidelity. It looks like a portable power bank for your phone. You can leave it on the table and nobody will look twice." "Is this admissible?" I asked. "In a common area of the home where you are an invited guest." Lucas shrugged. "It is a gray area, but we are not trying to convict him of murder. We are trying to establish intent to defraud. If he admits on tape that he plans to forge a signature, or if he coerces your father, that gives me probable cause to seize his laptop and open a formal investigation. Once I have his hard drive, I will find the rest." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second device. It was a one-scanner, sleek and black, about the size of a ruler. "And this is for the paper," he said when he puts that quitclaim deed on the table. "I want you to scan it. High resolution. I need to see the metadata of the physical document if possible. Printer codes, margin anomalies, but mostly I need a copy of exactly what he is trying to get your dad to sign before he can snatch it back or shred it." I took the scanner. It felt heavy in my hand. It felt like a weapon. "Get him comfortable," Lucas advised. A con man is most vulnerable when he thinks the mark is asleep. Let him brag. Let him explain his genius plan. They always want to show off how smart they are. I spent the rest of the afternoon securing a perimeter. I drove to my parents' house while Alyssa and Derek were out meeting a contractor, which I suspected actually meant meeting a bail bondsman or a loan shark. My mother was in the garden deadheading petunias. She looked up, surprised to see me. "Riley, I thought you were working." "I took the afternoon off," I said. "I wanted to help you get ready for tomorrow, and I wanted to check Dad's computer. He said it was running slow." Mom smiled, that anxious, hopeful smile that broke my heart. "You are a good girl, Riley. I am so glad you and your sister are working this out. It breaks my father's heart when you two fight." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I am trying, Mom. I just want Alyssa to be stable." I went into the den and booted up the ancient desktop computer my father used for solitaire and email. I worked quickly. I wasn't just checking for viruses. I was checking for intruders. I logged into my father's email account. My suspicions were confirmed instantly. In the trash folder, I found 3 password reset confirmation emails from his bank dated 2 days ago. Derek had accessed the account, changed the password, and then deleted the notifications. He was already inside. I went to the browser history. It was a roadmap of desperation. Quick cash loans, no credit check, how to remove a lien holder, quick claim deed template, Ohio notary services near me, cash only. He was not just looking for a refinance. He was looking for a way to erase Blue Fern Holdings. He must have seen the name on the mortgage statement and was trying to figure out who they were. I felt a surge of cold anger. He was hunting me, and he didn't even know it. I changed every password, email, banking, utilities. I set up 2-factor authentication to ping my phone, not my father's. I locked the digital doors and barred the windows. When Derek tried to log in tonight, he would find himself shut out. That would make him desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. I cleared my tracks, wiping the browser history of my own activity. Then I did something I hated. I went back out to the garden and sat next to my mother on the bench. "Mom," I said, taking her hand. It was rough, calloused from years of work. "I promise I'm going to make sure the house is handled. You do not have to worry about the money anymore." She squeezed my hand. "I know, honey." Alyssa explained it. "Derek is going to consolidate everything. It is going to be a fresh start." I did not correct her. I could not tell her that the fresh start was a cliff edge. I just nodded. "That sounds promising." I said I left the house before Alyssa and Derek returned. I did not want to see them yet. I needed to maintain the distance until the trap was set. Back in my apartment, I prepared the final element. I took out my phone and composed a text to Alyssa. "Hey, just wanted to confirm for tomorrow at 7. I'm bringing a bottle of that wine you like, and tell Derek not to worry. I've been looking at the market, and I think his idea about leveraging the equity might have merit if the rates are right. Let's just get it done." It was the perfect lie. It validated her. It validated him. And it promised the one thing: they wanted compliance. The response came 3 minutes later. "Thanks, Riley." 3. "We are so excited. Derek has all the papers ready. See you then." I stared at the heart emoji. It was bright red and cheerful. It was the kind of emoji you send when you are planning a brunch. Not grand larceny to Alyssa. That heart meant victory. It meant she had worn me down. It meant she was the queen of the castle again. To me, that heart looked like a target. I set the phone down on my counter. Next to it lay the digital recorder and the one scanner, my toolkit. I spent the evening rehearsing. I practiced sliding the recorder onto the table under a napkin. I practiced using the scanner in my lap. I practiced the neutral expressions I would need to wear. While Derek lied to my face, I thought about the chess of it all. In chess, there is a move called a gambit. You sacrifice a piece of pawn, sometimes even a knight, to gain a positional advantage. I had sacrificed my pride. I had sacrificed my reputation in the family, letting them think I was difficult and jealous. I was about to sacrifice the piece of a family dinner, but the endgame was worth it. Derek thought he was playing against Frank and Darlene, 2 tired people who just wanted to rest. He did not know he was playing against Blue Fern Holdings. He did not know he was playing against the state of Ohio's fraud statutes. And he certainly did not know he was playing against a sister who was done being the runner-up. I looked at the clock. 24 hours. 24 hours until I walked back into that house. People usually think that criminals get caught because they are being hunted, but that is rarely true. In my experience, most criminals get caught because they are invited. They are invited to take a little more, to go a little faster, to sign one more paper. They get caught because someone opens a door and says, "Come on in. The water is fine." I had opened the door. I had filled the pool. Now all I had to do was wait for Derek to dive in. I went to bed early, but I did not sleep well. I dreamed of paperwork. I dreamed of ink that turned into blood and signatures that wrapped around my father's throat like chains. I woke up before my alarm sweating. But when I washed my face in the morning, the woman looking back at me in the mirror was not afraid. She was ready. The game was set. The pieces were on the board. And Wipe My Side was about to move. The second dinner began with the kind of forced cheerfulness that usually precedes a natural disaster. The roast chicken on the table smelled of rosemary and lemon, a scent that should have been comforting but instead felt cloying in the warm, stagnant air of the dining room. My mother had set the table with placemats this time, not the white tablecloth, a subtle downgrade in formality that suggested this was a working meeting, not a celebration. Derek did not even pretend to be interested in the food. On Tuesday, he had at least made a show of cutting his meat. Tonight, he treated his plate like an obstacle. He sat on the edge of his chair, his posture rigid, vibrating with an impatient energy that made him look like a greyhound waiting for the mechanical rabbit. The thick folder was already on the table, resting between the salt shaker and the butter dish. "We should probably get started while we eat," Derek said, uncapping his water bottle. "I have a hard stop at 9:00 for a conference call with the underwriters, and I want to make sure we have everything submitted before the portal closes for the weekend." There was no conference call. There were no underwriters. The county recorder's office closed at 5:00 on weekdays. But my parents did not know that. To them, the world of high finance was a mysterious place that operated on a 24-hour cycle of urgency. Dad looked at his potatoes. "Is it really that rush? Derek, I thought we had some time to think it over. Time is money." "Frank," Derek said, shaking his head with a grimace. "Literally, the rates are fluctuating by the hour. The Fed is talking about a hike next week if we do not lock in the restructuring tonight. We could be looking at an extra 2 points on the interest over the life of the loan. That is, well, it is a lot of money." He did not say how much money. He just let the vague threat of a lot hang over my father's head. He opened the folder. This time he did not slide it across. He began to deal the papers out like playing cards, forming neat stacks in front of my father. "Here is the strategy," Derek said, his voice taking on the smooth rhythmic cadence of a late-night infomercial. "We are going to execute a cash-out refinance to clear the existing encumbrances. Then we open a HELOC, that is a home equity line of credit, to create a liquidity buffer. It optimizes your cash flow. Basically, we are making the house work for you instead of you working for the house." I took a sip of my wine to hide my expression. Encumbrances, liquidity buffer, optimize cash flow. He was throwing word salad at them. You do not optimize cash flow on a primary residence owned by retirees. You live in it, and you certainly do not take out a high-interest line of credit to create a safety net. That is like digging a hole to store your ladder. "Can I see the papers?" I asked. I did not ask it aggressively. I asked it with a mild curiosity, reaching out my hand. Derek hesitated for a fraction of a second. His eyes flipped to Alyssa, then back to me. "Sure," he said, sliding one of the stacks toward me, "but it is pretty technical stuff. Riley, standard boilerplate." I picked up the top document. It was titled Loan Modification Agreement. I scanned the first paragraph. My eyes narrowed. The font in the header was Times New Roman, size 12. The body text was Arial, size 11, and the justification was off. The right margin zigzagged like a saw blade. This wasn't a document generated by a bank's legal department. This was a document stitched together from 3 different templates found on Google. I flipped to the second page. Clause 4 stated, "The borrower agrees to transfer all rights of survivorship to the cosigner effectively immediately upon execution." I felt a cold spike in my chest. Rights of survivorship. If my father signed this and Derek was listed as the cosigner and something happened to Dad, the house wouldn't go to Mom. It wouldn't go to the estate. It would go directly to Derek. I looked at the dates. The header said October 14th, 2024. The footer in tiny print said revised January 2022. He hadn't even bothered to update the footer from the template he stole. And then I saw the notary block. Usually a document has a blank space for the notary to sign and stamp. This document had the blank space, but someone had drawn a faint pencil check mark in the corner of the box. A little tick. It was a signal. Sign here and the rest will be filled in later. It is amazing, I said, keeping my voice light, how fast they can put these together. Technology, right? Derek said, grinning. It is all automated now. Dad was squinting at the stack in front of him. He was trying to read the fine print, but his eyes were tired. He rubbed his temples. "There is so much here," Dad muttered. "I do not understand this part about the quit claim regarding existing liens. I thought we were refinancing, not quitting." Derek leaned forward, invading my father's personal space. "That is just legal jargon, Frank. It just means you're quitting the old bad loan to get into the new good loan. Don't get hung up on the vocabulary. Focus on the result. No more bills, a fixed roof, peace of mind." "I should probably read it all," Dad said, his voice wavering. "Frank, please," Derek said, snapping his fingers. "We are burning daylight. Every minute we wait is interest echoing. Do you want to pay the bank, or do you want to keep that money for Darlene?" It was a low blow. He was weaponizing my father's love for my mother against him. Alyssa chimed in right on cue. She reached across the table and covered Dad's hand with hers. "Daddy, look at me," she said. Her eyes were swimming with unshed tears. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Do you not trust us? Do you not trust me? I am your daughter. I came all the way back here to take care of you. If you do not sign this, it feels like you are saying I am not capable, like I am a failure." Dad wilted. The fight drained out of him. He looked from Melissa to Mom. Mom looked terrified. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Please." Riley, her look said, "Do not start a fight. Let him sign. Let us have peace." She wanted the tension to end more than she wanted to keep the house. She was willing to pay $300,000 ransom just to stop the dinner table from feeling like a war zone. I looked at the document in my hand again. The page I was holding was the signature page. It had no text at the top, just lines for signatures. If Dad signed this page, Derek could staple it to anything. He could staple it to a deed transfer. He could staple it to a confession. He could staple it to a power of attorney granting him total control over their medical decisions. I needed to get this to Marianne. I needed a lawyer to confirm what my gut was screaming. I patted my pockets, frowning. "Shoot," I said. Everyone looked at me. "Bart," Alyssa snapped. "My reading glasses." I lied. "I must have left them in the glove compartment. The print on this is so small, and I have had a headache all day. I cannot focus on it." "Just use Dad's," Alyssa said dismissively. "Dad's prescription is like looking through a fishbowl," I said with a self-deprecating laugh. "I will be right back. Just 2 minutes. Do not sign anything until I get back. Dad, I want to double-check that interest rate clause Derek mentioned." I stood up before anyone could object. I grabbed the stack of papers I'd been holding, the ones with the mismatched fonts, and tucked them under my arm, as if absent-mindedly. "Hey, leave the papers here," Derek said sharply. "I'm just taking them to the car so I can read them under the map light while I find my glasses," I said, not breaking my stride. "I want to be efficient, right? Time is money." I walked out the front door before he could stop me. As soon as the heavy wood clicked shut, I sprinted to my car. I threw the papers on the passenger seat and turned on the overhead light. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I pulled out my phone. Click, click, click. I photographed the font discrepancy. I photographed the rights of survivorship clause. I photographed the blank signature page with the pencil tick. I opened my messaging app and sent the images to Marian. Subject urgent. Look at the signature page and the font change. I watched the three little dots appear immediately. Marianne was at her desk. She knew tonight was the night. A phone buzzed in my hand 30 seconds later. Marianne, this is a Frank indeed. It's stitched together. That signature page is a floater. It has no header, no page number. If he signs that, they can attach it to a transfer deed later. It's a classic bait and switch. Do not let him sign that specific page. I typed back. He's pushing hard. Says rates are expiring. Marianne, he's lying. Rates don't expire at 8:00 p.m. This is predatory pressure. You need to stop the pen. I took a deep breath. I had what I needed. This wasn't just a bad deal. It was a fraudulent instrument. The intent was clear in the construction of the document itself. I looked at the house. The windows were glowing warm and yellow against the dark night. It looked so peaceful from the outside. Inside, a robbery was in progress. I deleted the photos from my camera roll, keeping only the copies in the secure chat app. I grabbed a pair of sunglasses from my center console, the only glasses I had, and shoved them into my pocket. I walked back to the house. The gravel crunched loudly. I wanted them to hear me coming. I wanted Derek to have a moment to compose himself, to think he was safe. When I walked back into the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. Dad was holding the pen. The tip was hovering inches above the paper. Derek was leaning over him, pointing at the line just right there. Frank, Derek was saying, press hard. It is a carbon copy. I cleared my throat. Dad froze. He looked up at me, relief washing over his face. He put the pen down. Got them? Derek asked, his eyes darting to my empty hands. I patted my pocket. Yeah, but you know what? I walked over to the table and placed the stack of papers back down. I smoothed them out with my palm. I looked at Derek. I let a small defeated smile play on my lips. I looked at the numbers. I said, and honestly, you are right about the cash flow. The interest rate is aggressive. But if it clears the other debts, I can see why you want to do it. Derek blinked. He hadn't expected agreement. He had expected a fight. A slow grin spread across his face. Exactly, he said, exhaling a breath he must have been holding. I told you, Riley. It is just math. Alyssa clapped her hands together. See, I told you she would come around. Oh, this is great. We are finally all working together. Mom looked like she might cry with relief. Thank you, Riley, she whispered. I looked at Dad. He picked up the pen again, looking at me for confirmation. So I should sign, Dad asked. I smiled at him, a genuine warm smile. Yes, Dad. I said if this is the plan, we should move forward. Derek pumped his fist slightly. All right, let us get this done. Sign on the line, Frank. But, I added, my voice cutting through the celebration like a razor wire. Derek froze. But, I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction. Since this involves the house, the only asset the family has, we need to do it correctly. We cannot have Dad signing loose pieces of paper with mismatched fonts. That will get kicked back by the county clerk in 2 seconds. You know how bureaucratic they are. Derek's smile faltered. It is fine, Riley. It is a standard draft. It is not fine. I said it is sloppy. And if we are going to trust you with the family estate, Derek, we need you to be professional. I reached into my bag, which was sitting on the floor by my chair. So I said, pulling out my phone. I took the liberty of calling a mobile notary, a real one. She is a friend of mine. She is parked around the corner. Derek's face went pale. You did what I called a notary. I repeated cheerfully. If we are signing tonight, let us make it official. No tick marks on the notary block. No pending stamps. We do it live right here, at the table. That way, the funds get released faster, right? Because the verification is immediate. I watched the panic flicker in his eyes. He didn't want a real notary. A real notary would ask for ID. A real notary would log the document in a journal. A real notary would see that the page numbers didn't match. We do not need a notary. Derek stammered. I have a guy who handles it in the back end. It saves fees. Dad hates fees. Alyssa added, trying to follow Derek's lead. I laughed. "Oh, don't worry. I am paying for it. Consider it my contribution to the fresh start." I tapped my phone screen. "She is walking up the driveway now," I said. The doorbell rang. The sound was sharp and loud in the silence of the dining room. Derek looked at the door, then at the folder, then at me. He looked like a trapped animal. I smiled at him cold and hard. "Open the door, Derek," I said. "Let us get those signatures." He didn't move. "Go on," I urged. "You wanted this done tonight, didn't you?" I had called his bluff. I had brought the one thing a con artist cannot survive: sunlight. And as the doorbell rang a second time, insistent and authoritative, I knew the game had officially moved from the planning phase to the execution phase. "Okay," I said, standing up. "I will get it." I walked past Derek. I could smell his cologne, and beneath it, the sharp, sour scent of fear. I opened the front door. Dana Holt stood there. She wasn't just a notary. She was a forensic document examiner who worked with Lucas's unit. She was holding a notary bag in one hand and a very official-looking ledger in the other. "Good evening," she said loudly, stepping into the foyer. "I am here for the signing." I stepped back to let her in. "Right this way," I said. "The parties are eager to proceed." I led her into the dining room. Derek was still sitting there, but his hand was hovering over the papers as if he were thinking about grabbing them and running. But it was too late. The witness was in the room. "Let us see if those numbers really add up," I thought. "Let us see what happens when you have to sign your name to your own lie." The arrival of Dana Holt changed the molecular density of the room. Until that moment, the dining room had been a stage for a family drama filled with emotional manipulation and guilt trips. But when Dana walked in, the genre shifted abruptly. We were no longer in a soap opera. We were in a procedural. Dana was a woman who occupied space with intentionality. She was tall, wearing a charcoal blazer that looked sharp enough to cut glass, and she carried a black notary bag that looked less like an accessory and more like a piece of tactical equipment. She did not smile. She did not apologize for the interruption. She simply walked to the head of the table, placed her bag down next to the centerpiece, and looked at us with the dispassionate gaze of a surgeon preparing to cut. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was level, stripped of any conversational warmth. "I was informed there are documents requiring immediate notarization regarding a property transfer and loan modification." Derek was still sitting, but his body language had gone rigid. He looked like a kid who had been caught smoking behind the gym, trying to figure out if he could talk his way out of suspension. He forced a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. It sat on his face like a sticker that was starting to peel at the edges. "Yeah, that is us," Derek said, leaning back and trying to look casual. "But honestly, we did not think we needed to bring in a third party tonight. We were just going to get the signatures and handle the stamp later. Keep it in the family." "You know," Dana did not blink, "that is not how the law works, sir." She said in the state of Ohio, for a real estate transfer to be recorded, the acknowledgement must be contemporaneous. That means I watch you sign and I verify your identity in the moment. Later is not a legal concept I'm familiar with. She unzipped her bag. The sound of the heavy zipper tearing open was loud in the quiet room. She pulled out a thick-bound journal, her notary logbook, and a terrifyingly official embossment stamp. "Please place your government-issued photo ID on the table," she commanded. "All parties signing or witnessing." Derek let out a huff of annoyance. "This is ridiculous. We are all family here. Frank is my future father-in-law. Do you really need to see his driver's license to know he is Frank Adams?" Dana stopped moving. She looked at Derek. "Identity fraud is the fastest growing crime in the country," she said. "I do not know you. I do not know him. And I certainly do not know if you are who you say you are. IT." Now I saw Alyssa lean in close to Derek. Her lips barely moved, but in the silence I could hear the whisper. "Just do it," she hissed. "She is just doing her job. Don't make a scene. Riley is watching." Derek grounded his jaw. He knew he was being cornered, but he also knew that refusing to show ID would look incredibly suspicious. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He slapped his license onto the mahogany table with more force than necessary. "Fine," he snapped. "Here." I placed my ID down calmly. Dad fumbled for his wallet, his hands shaking as he pulled out his license. Dana picked up each card. She held them up to the light, checking the holograms. She compared the faces to the people sitting at the table. She took her time. It was agonizingly slow, and I loved every second of it. She was establishing control. She was stripping Derek of his power, minute by minute. When she got to Derek's ID, she paused. She tilted it back and forth. Then she looked at him, then back at the card. She wrote something down in her law book. She did not say what it was, but the scratch of her pen on the paper sounded like a nail being hammered into a coffin. "Okay," Daner said, setting the ID aside. "Let us see the documents." Derek pushed the stack of papers toward her. "Just the standard stuff," he said quickly. "Quim, power of attorney, loan mod. We are in a bit of a rush, so if we could just skip to the signature pages, that would be great." Dana ignored him. She picked up the stack. She did not flip to the back. She started at the front. She put on a pair of reading glasses and began to read. The room was silent except for the turning of pages. Derek was tapping his foot against the table leg. A frantic rhythmic thudding. Alyssa was twisting her napkin into a tight rope. Mom was looking back and forth between everyone, sensing the tension but not understanding the source. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I was the statue in the storm. After 2 minutes, Dana looked up. "This document has no page numbers," she said. "It is a draft," Derek said defensively. "The final will be formatted, and the font changes on page 3, she continued, "and the notary block on the signature page." She held up the page I had photographed earlier. "This block has a pre-marked indicator," she noted, "and there is no document title on this page. If this page is signed, it could theoretically be attached to any document, a will, a confession, a sale deed for a different property. It goes with the loan mod," Derek shouted. His voice cracked slightly. "Jesus, why is everyone being so difficult tonight? It is just paper. It is a legal instrument." Dana corrected him coldly. "And as a notary, I cannot notarize a signature on a loose leaf that is not clearly bound or paginated to the parent document. It puts the signer at risk of fraud." She looked at my father. "Mr. Adams," she said, "do you understand what this gentleman is asking you to sign?" Dad looked at Derek, then at Dana. "I will. He says it is to lower the bills, to get some cash out." Dana looked back at the papers. She pulled out a specific sheet. It was the affidavit of voluntary action. "I am going to need to read a few clauses aloud," she said, "standard procedure when there are questions about the document's integrity." She cleared her throat. Clause 7. She read, "The borrower acknowledges that they are entering into this transaction of their own free will without duress, coercion, or undue influence. The borrower understands that this transaction may result in the loss of equity and, in the event of default, the loss of the primary residence." She lowered the paper. "Mr. Adams, do you understand that if you sign this and the payments are not made, you will be evicted from this home?" Dad paled evicted. Derek said we were safe. He said this was protection. Derek slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "Oh, for God's sake," he yelled. "This is boilerplate. It is just legal mumbo-jumbo they have to put in there. Frank, you know me. You know Alyssa. We are not going to evict you. We are family." He reached over and grabbed the papers from Dana's hand. It was a violent, impulsive motion. "We do not need to read the fine print," he spat. "We just need the signature. The rates expire at midnight. We are wasting time." He flipped the stack over to the back page, the blank one with just the line. He shoved it in front of my father. "Just sign it, Frank," he ordered. His voice was no longer smooth. It was a growl. "Sign the damn line so we can save your house." Dad picked up the pen. He looked terrified. He was not signing because he agreed. He was signing because he was afraid of the anger radiating from the man across the table. I saw the pen tip touch the paper. In that second, the world seemed to slow down. I saw the ink about to flow. I saw the future where my parents were homeless and Derek was driving a new Porsche paid for with their misery. No, I moved. I reached across the table, my hand moving faster than thought. I placed my palm flat on the paper, covering the signature line. I did not slam it. I just placed it there. A barrier, a wall. No, I said. Derek looked at my hand, then up at my face. His eyes were wide with shock and rage. Get your hand off the paper, Riley, he hissed. No, I repeated. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. We are not skipping the reading. Riley, stop it, Alyssa cried out. You are ruining everything. I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on Derek. We are going to read every single word, Derek. Every clause, every fine print disclaimer, because if this is really to help them, you should have no problem explaining exactly how they lose their house in Clause 7. Derek's face turned a mottled red. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Who do you think you are? He shouted. You are a nobody. You are just the jealous little sister who cannot stand that we are making moves. You do not own this house. Dad looked up at Derek, shrinking back into his chair. Derek was looming over him now, physically intimidating. Dana did not move. She was watching Derek. Her hand was quietly moving across her log book, writing down everything he said. Derek, please. Mom whimpered. Sit down, Derek. I said, I am not sitting down, he roared. I am done with this charade. He pointed a finger at my father. Frank, pick up the pen. Sign the paper now or we walk. Alyssa and I walk out that door and we lead you to drown in this money pit. Is that what you want? Do you want to die here broke? It was an ultimatum. It was pure distilled coercion. Dad looked at me. His eyes were wet. Riley. I did not look at Dad. I looked at Dana. I gave her a microscopic nod. Dana cleared her throat. She looked at my father. Mr. Adams, she asked, her voice cutting through Derek's shouting. Do you feel that you are being forced to sign this document against your will? Dad hesitated. He looked at Derek's furious face. I do not want them to leave, Dad stammered. That is not the question, Dana said sharply. Are you signing this because you want to transfer your property or because you are afraid of the consequences if you do not? Derek leaned in. It is just a house, Frank, he screamed. It is just a stupid pile of bricks. Sign the paper. It does not matter what it says. Just sign it so I can get the money. The silence that followed was absolute. He had said it. Just sign it so I can get the money. Not so we can save the house. Not so we can help you. So I can get the money. He had admitted the motive. He had admitted the beneficiary. And he had done it in front of a caught admissible witness while trying to physically intimidate a senior citizen. I watched Dana. She finished writing the sentence in her log book. She put a period at the end. It was a very firm dot. Then she closed the book. The sound of the cover slamming shut was like a gunshot. She stood up. She picked up the stack of papers. The frank indeed, the mismatched fonts, the blank signature page, and she slid them into her bag. Hey, Derek yelled. That is my property. No, sir. Dana said her voice was ice. That is evidence of an attempted fraudulent conveyance. And, as a mandated reporter of elder financial abuse, I am retaining this document. Derek stared at her. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face as the realization hit him. He had not just lost the argument. He had lost the war. I stood up slowly. I picked up the pen from the table, the heavy black pen Derek had brought, and I capped it. I think we are done with the signing, I said. Derek looked at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was adorning horror. You set me up, he whispered. I did not answer him. I just looked toward the front door because I knew who was standing on the front porch waiting for the signal. I knew that the text message Dana had just subtly sent from under the table had 3 words. Subject is hostile. Oh, the doorbell did not ring this time. There was a heavy authoritative knock. 3 sharp raps. Police open up. Derek flinched as if he had been struck. Alyssa let out a gasp. Mom covered her mouth. I walked to the door. I felt light. I felt weightless. I opened the door, and the cool night air rushed in, bringing with it Officer Lucas Brandt and his partner. They were in uniform. They looked very large and very serious. We received a report of an active fraud in progress, Lucas said, looking past me at Derek. Derek Vore, Lucas asked. Derek tried to step back, but his chair hit the wall. I turned to look at him. "I told you." "Derek," I said softly, "we have to do it by the book." And now the book was about to be thrown at him. The silence that followed Holt's declaration was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and vibrating with the kind of kinetic energy that precedes an explosion. Derek was standing, his chest heaving, his hand frozen halfway to the notary badge he had tried to snatch. Dana sat immovable, her hand resting protectively over the evidence of his crime. But I was not looking at Derek. I was looking at my sister. For 34 years, Alyssa had been the protagonist of our family story. She was the one who needed saving, the one who needed understanding, the one whose intentions were always assumed to be golden, even when her actions were lead. But as she sat there twisting a diamond ring that I strongly suspected was bought on credit, the lighting seemed to change. The soft glow of the dining room chandelier was no longer flattering. It was harsh. It highlighted the tightness around her mouth and the cold calculation in her eyes that she had forgotten to hide. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Tell me the truth, Alyssa," I said. My voice was low, but in that vacuum of silence it sounded like a shout. "Are you moving in here to take care of Mom and Dad, or are you moving in because you need a physical address to qualify for a loan that you plan to secure against this house?" Alyssa flinched. It was a small involuntary jerk of her head, like she had been slapped. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that felt rehearsed. "I am not asking for a performance," I said, cutting her off. "I am asking for a number. How much debt are you in? Is it 50,000? 80,000? Is that why Derek is so desperate to close this tonight?" Because the sharks are circling, Alyssa's face crumbled, but not into sadness. It crumbled into ugly, jagged anger. She slammed her hand onto the table. "Mom," she shrieked, turning to Darlene. "Look at her. Look at what she is doing. She is ruining everything. She always does this. She thinks she is so smart, sitting there with her little job and her little judgment. She has always been jealous of me." It was the classic defense. When caught, play the victim. When cornered, attack the character of the accuser. Mom looked between us, her eyes wide and watery. She was paralyzed for decades. Her role had been to smooth things over, to make peace at any cost, but she could not smooth over a felony. "Riley, please," Mom stammered. "Your sister loves us. She just wants to be close." "She does not want to be close, Mom," I said ruthlessly. "She wants to be liquid." Derek stepped in. Then he had recovered from the shock of Dana's refusal and was shifting into a new gear. If he could not charm us, and he could not bully us, he would try to discredit me. He straightened his jacket, trying to regain the veneer of the successful businessman. "You know, Frank," Derek said, turning his back on me to address my father, "it is interesting that Riley is so obsessed with finances. Usually the person pointing the finger is the one with something to hide." He cast a sidelong glance at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Maybe we should be looking into Riley's accounts," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I mean, she works in compliance, right? She knows how to move things around. Maybe she's blocking this deal because she has already leveraged the house. Maybe she borrowed money against it years ago and doesn't want you to find out." It was a bold lie. It was almost impressive in its audacity. He was projecting his own sins onto me in real time. My father looked at me, confusion clouding his face. "Riley is that true?" I felt a flash of heat in my chest, but I forced it down. I kept my face blank. "That is a creative theory." "Derek," I said, "but if we are talking about hidden filings, let us talk about the county clerk's office." Derek froze. The smirk vanished. "I know about the filing you tried to submit 3 days ago." I said, "the one attempting to change the mailing address for the property taxes to a post office box in your name." The room went dead silent. Even Alyssa stopped hyperventilating. Derek's eyes darted left and right. "But I do not know what you are talking about. Reference number ending in 82. I recited from memory. Filed electronically. Suspended due to lack of authorization. You tried to divert the tax bill so Mom and Dad wouldn't see the delinquency notices once you stopped paying." Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had walked into a room thinking he was the only one with a weapon, only to realize he was standing in a firing squad. And let us talk about Arizona, I added. Vantage Point Properties, the lawsuit regarding the estate of Eleanor Riggs. Does that ring a bell? Or did you think that because it was settled out of court, nobody in Ohio would know you tried to pull this exact same scam on an 80-year-old woman with dementia? Derek took a step back. He bumped into the china cabinet. The glass rattled. You checked me out, he whispered. I work in compliance. Derek, I said I check everyone out. Alyssa stood up. She looked frantic now. The narrative was slipping away from her, and she was scrambling to grab the threads. It is not a scam, she yelled. We just needed a bridge. The words hung in the air. A bridge? I asked. A bridge to what? Alyssa. She looked at Derek, then at Mom, then at me. Her eyes were wild. We just needed the address for a few months, she blurted out. Just until Derek's settlement comes through. We were going to pay it back. We just needed to show assets on the balance sheet to get the bridge loan for his startup. We weren't going to take the house forever, just for a few months until everything was stable. My mother made a sound. It was a small, sharp intake of breath, like she had been punched in the gut. She stood up slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support. A few months, Mom asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more weight than all of Derek's shouting. Alyssa turned to her, desperate. Yes, Mama. See, it was just temporary. We were going to fix it. Mom stared at her favorite daughter. She looked at the woman she had defended, the woman she had praised, the woman she had elevated above everything else. You said you were moving in to take care of us, Mom said. She sounded confused, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. You said you wanted to be here. You said family helps family. We do, Alyssa cried. But we just needed this one thing first. Lon shook her head slowly. You were going to leave, Mom asked. After you got the money, you were going to leave us here with the debt. No, Alyssa screamed. Well, not leave. Just move to a better place for everyone. She was drowning, and in her panic, she was telling the truth. She was revealing that we were not family to her. We were collateral. We were rungs on a ladder she was trying to climb. Derek saw the ship sinking. He decided to abandon the passengers. Shut up, Alyssa, he snapped. He turned to the table. He looked at the notary bag where Daner had secured the papers. Give me the file, he said to Daner. Daner did not flinch. I cannot do that, sir. It is my property, Derek shouted. He lunged forward. It happened fast. Derek reached for the bag. Daner, who had been sitting calmly, moved with surprising speed. She slid the bag off the table and stood up, placing herself between him and the evidence. Do not touch me, she warned. Her voice was still. I am taking my papers and I am leaving. Derek roared. He was losing control. The smooth corporate facade was gone, replaced by the desperation of a cornered animal. He reached for Daner again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single sharp vibration. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a text message. Lucas, I am outside. We heard the threat. Entering now. I looked up at Derek. He was red-faced. His hand raised toward Daner. Alyssa was sobbing. Mom was standing there, looking like her world had ended. Dad was still sitting in his chair, staring at the empty space where the papers had been, looking old and broken. It was a tableau of total destruction, and it was time to drop the final curtain. Derek, I said. He spun around to face me, his fists clenched. But what do you want? Before you decide to assault a court officer, I said, my voice calm and steady, and before you try to bully your way out of this house with a folder full of lies, there is one more thing you need to know. I walked around the table until I was standing next to my father. I put my hand on his shoulder. He reached up and covered my hand with his. His hand was cold. You kept saying you needed Dad's signature. I continued. You kept saying you needed him to sign the quick claim to transfer the title. Yeah, so what? Derek spat. It is his house. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, it isn't. The room went quiet. Alyssa stopped crying. Derek frowned. What are you talking about? Alyssa whispered. Of course, it is his house. We grew up here. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had taken everything and given nothing 4 years ago. I said, when the bank was about to foreclose, when you were telling everyone at the country club how you saved the family, I was the one writing the checks. I paused, letting the words land. I bought the note. Alyssa, I bought the debt, and I transferred the title into a holding trust to protect it from exactly this kind of situation. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a draft. It was a certified copy of a deed stamped with the official seal of the county recorder dated 4 years ago. I placed it on the table. The house on Maple Row does not belong to Frank and Darlene Adams. I said, it belongs to the Maple Row Family Trust, and I am the sole trustee. Derek stared at the paper. He looked like he was trying to read a foreign language. You own the house, he stammered. I nodded. I own the house. I own the mortgage. I own the equity. I looked him dead in the eye. And here's the thing about the trust, Derek. It has a very specific clause. It states that the property cannot be used as collateral for any loan ever. It cannot be refinanced. It cannot be leveraged. I stepped closer to him. So even if you had forced Dad to sign that paper, even if you had forged his name perfectly, it would have been worthless. You were trying to steal a car that had no engine. You were trying to rob an empty vault. Alyssa let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You, she gasped. You own the house, but you're broke. You drive a 10-year-old car. You never have money for anything. I looked at my sister with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. I have money, Alyssa, I said. I just don't wear it. I use it to keep a roof over our parents' heads while you were busy pretending to be rich. Derek looked at the paper, then at the front door, then back at me. The realization was washing over him. He had spent months planning this. He had spent money on fake filings. He had risked his freedom, and it was all for nothing. He had been checkmated before he even sat down at the board. You played me, he whispered. You sat there and let me dig my own grave. I did not smile. There was no joy in this victory. It was just necessary. I did not play you, Derek. I said, I just let you be yourself. I looked at the front door, and now I said, checking my watch, I think your time is up. As if on cue, the heavy oak door swung open, but this time it was not a guest. It was the consequences. The uniform of the county sheriff's department filled the frame. Officer Lucas Brandt stepped into the hallway, his face grim. Derek Vaughan, he called out. Derek turned slowly. He looked at the open door. He looked at the papers in Daner's bag. He looked at the deed on the table that bore my name. And for the first time all night, he didn't have anything to say. The revelation that I owned the house hung in the air, like smoke after a gunshot. Derek was staring at the deed on the table, his mouth slightly open, his brain trying to reconfigure the reality he thought he controlled. Alyssa was pale, her eyes darting between me and the document, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. But I was not done. I reached into my bag one last time. I pulled out a second folder. This one was blue, crisp, and sealed with a heavy legal binder clip. I placed it on top of the deed I had just shown them. You see, Derek, owning the house was my first step, I said, my voice steady and cold. But I know how people like you operate. I know that if I owned it personally, you would just shift your target. You would try to guilt me, sue me, or manipulate Mom into begging me to sign it over to you. I tapped the blue folder. So this morning, before I drove down here, I made one final stop at the county recorder's office. I filed a new transfer. I opened the folder. The document on top was titled the Maple Row Irrevocable Family Trust. As of 4:00 this afternoon, this house is no longer property of Riley Adams. I announced it is now the property of the trust, and I am not the trustee. Alyssa gasped. Who is the trustee? Marianne Cole, I said, my attorney. The woman who eats fraud for breakfast, and the terms of the trust are ironclad. Mom and Dad have a lifetime right of occupancy. They can live here until the day they die, rent-free, worry-free. But nobody, not me, not them, and certainly not you, can use this property as collateral. It cannot be sold. It cannot be refinanced. It cannot be leveraged against a startup loan or a gambling debt. I looked straight at Derek. It is a dead asset to you. Derek, it is a fortress. You cannot get a single penny out of these walls." Alyssa let out a low, strangled sound. "No," she whispered, "that is impossible. You cannot just lock it away like that. We need that equity." Her plan had relied on the pliability of family. She had banked on the idea that blood was thicker than ink, but she had forgotten that a trust is thicker than both. She looked at me with pure horror, realizing that her emotional weapons, her tears, her guilt trips, her tantrums were useless against a legal contract managed by a third party. Derek's face twisted. The shock was replaced by a surge of ugly, desperate adrenaline. He realized the walls were closing in, and he decided to try and break them down with brute force. "You selfish witch!" he screamed at me. "You ruined this family. We had a plan. We were going to fix everything, and you just had to come in here and play the hero." He spun around to face my father. He grabbed Dad's shoulder, his fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. "Frank, do not listen to her," Derek shouted, spit flying from his mouth. "She is lying. She is trying to steal your legacy. You can still sign. If you sign the quitclaim now, I can contest the trust. I can fight it in court. We just need your signature to show intent." He shoved the blank page with a single line back in front of my father. "Sign it," he roared. "Sign it right now. I will fix this. I will get the money." My father looked up at Derek for the first time all night. I saw the fog clear from his eyes. He looked at the hand gripping his shoulder. He looked at the face of the man who was screaming at him, and then he looked at the pen. Dad reached out. Derek's face lit up with a sick triumph. "Yes, that is it. Frank, show her." Dad picked up the pen, and then very deliberately he set it down on the far side of the table out of reach. "No," Dad said. His voice was raspy, but it was firm. Derek stared at him. "What?" I said. "No," Dad repeated. "Get your hands off me." Derek recoiled as if he had been burned. Dana Holt stood up. The sound of her chair scraping back was the only warning. She reached into her sealed notary bag and pulled out a fresh document. It was a single sheet of paper with a gold seal at the bottom. She spoke, and her voice was the voice of the law. "I am officially terminating this session," she announced, "and I am entering into the record this affidavit of observation." She held up the paper. "I, Dana Hull, certified notary public and officer of the court, have witnessed Mr. Derek Vaughan attempt to coerce a serial intimidation and verbal threats. I have witnessed him attempt to bypass mandatory identification procedures, and I have witnessed him explicitly state that his intent was to access funds for personal use, contradicting the stated purpose of the document." She looked at Derek. "You just tried to force a vulnerable senior citizen to sign a legal instrument after being informed that the property was not his to convey, that is attempted deed fraud, that is elder abuse, and that is a felony." Derek looked around the room. He looked at the papers. He looked at Dana. He looked at me. "This is a setup," he yelled. "You are all crazy. I'm leaving." He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "I am done helping you people. You deserve to rot in this house." He turned and bolted for the front door. He made it 3 steps before the front door swung open again. Officer Lucas Brandt stepped across the threshold. He was not alone. Behind him was another officer, a woman with a badge on her belt that identified her as a specialist in the financial crimes unit. Lucas filled the doorway. He was not smiling. "Going somewhere, Mr. Vaughan?" Lucas asked. Derek skidded to a halt. He looked back at the dining room window, calculating if he could jump through it. I have rights," Derek stammered. "I was just leaving. This is a private family dinner. It stopped being private when you tried to file a fraudulent tax document with the county 3 days ago," Lucas said. Lucas stepped forward, forcing Derek to back up until he was pressed against the hallway wall. "We have a warrant for the seizure of your electronic devices," Lucas continued, "and we have questions about a filing submitted under the name Devon regarding the property at 412 Maple Row." "I did not file that," Derek lied. "It was an error." Lucas reached for his belt and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal glinted under the hallway light. "We can discuss your clerical errors at the station," Lucas said. "Derek Vaughan, you are under arrest for attempted forgery, identity theft, and scheme to defraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Derek froze. He looked at Alyssa. Alyssa, he screamed. Do something. Tell them. Tell them it was your idea. Alyssa let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She scrambled backward, away from the table, away from Derek. No, she sobbed. No, he is lying. Mom, Mama, help me. She turned to Mom, reaching out her hands like a child wanting to be picked up. Mama, please tell them I did not know. Tell them I was just trying to help. Make them stop. For 30 years, my mother had jumped every time Alyssa cried. For 30 years, she had smoothed over the cracks, paid the debts, and hidden the ugly truths. But tonight, the truth was sitting on the dining room table in a blue folder. The truth was in the handcuffs clicking around Derek's wrists. The truth was in the terrified eyes of my father. Mom looked at Alyssa. She looked at the daughter she had worshipped. And then she looked at me. She looked at the daughter she had ignored. Mom did not move toward Alyssa. She did not open her arms. She took a step back. You knew Alyssa. Mom said, her voice was broken. But it was clear. You knew he wanted the money. You asked me where the deed was last week. You told me to trust him. Mama, Alyssa pleaded. Do not call me that. Mom whispered. Not tonight. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen my mother draw a line. It was tragic and it was overdue. Lucas and his partner marched Derek out the front door. Derek was still shouting, blaming everyone but himself, his voice fading into the night air. The female officer stayed behind. She walked over to Alyssa. Ms. Adams, she said firmly, we need you to come down to the station as well. We have questions about your involvement in the attempted transfer. You are not under arrest yet, but I strongly suggest you cooperate. Alyssa looked at the officer, then at the empty chair where Derek had been sitting. She realized she was alone. The golden child had no more armor. She stood up, her legs shaking, and walked out the door without looking back at us. The door closed. The silence that returned to the dining room was heavy, but it was clean. The toxicity had been drained out. Dad let out a long, shuddering breath. He slumped in his chair, looking older than I had ever seen him. Riley, he said. I walked over to him. I knelt down so I was at eye level. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. You have been paying for the house he asked for 4 years. I nodded since the notice came. Dad, I did not want you to worry. He looked at the blue folder, then he looked at his hands. And you never said anything, he whispered. You let Alyssa take the credit. You let your mother praise her. You sat there and let us treat you like you didn't matter. It was easier that way, I said softly. I just wanted you to have a home. I didn't need the applause. He reached out and touched my face. His hand was trembling. You saved us, he said. Not her few. I looked at Mom. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me with a mixture of shame and awe. She realized that, while she had been polishing the fake diamond, she had ignored the real one. I stood up. I gathered the papers from the table, the deed, the trust documents, the evidence of my silent stewardship. I am going to leave these with you. I said, Marianne will call you tomorrow to explain how the trust works. You are safe. Nobody can take this from you. Not a bank, not Derek, not even Alyssa. I picked up my bag. Where are you going? Mom asked, her voice filled with panic. Riley, please stay. We need to talk. We need to fix this. I looked at them. I loved them. I would always ensure they were safe. But I could not stay in that house. Not tonight. The ghosts were gone, but the echoes were still too loud. I cannot stay. Mom, I said. I have work in the morning. I walked to the front door. I paused and looked back at them. They were sitting at the table, 2 small figures, in a large safe house that was finally truly theirs. Family is not where you take from each other until there is nothing left, I said. My voice was calm. Final. If you want us to live together, if you want us to be a family again, then we have to learn how to live in the truth. I opened the door and walked out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. I got into my car and started the engine. I did not look back at the house on Maple Row. I did not need to. I knew it was still standing. I knew the foundation was solid. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I was not the invisible daughter. I was the owner. And the rent had finally been paid in full. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and family secrets. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come to light, please subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to see the good guys win. Thanks.